So my name is Larissa Finley, and I'm the VP of Education for the Greater St. Louis MGMA. And I am very happy to introduce our speaker, Deb Wiggs, today. She is going to be speaking about how Adept is your organization, the 5 value functions of practice performance. She is the founder of V2V Management Solutions. And a little bit more about her. She's been transforming medical care delivery since her career began. She has established rural health clinics, grown multi-special physician practices, and facilitated countless strategy sessions that have helped clients achieve a sustainable competitive advantage. Deb's great love is to pass this knowledge along via public speaking with humor, practical reality, and a commitment to provide resources that transform how care is delivered. And as a past board chair of MGMA, she understands the complexity of the healthcare system and knows how to work in it without making it more complicated. Her strengths lie in strategic planning, governance, and leadership coaching. So with that, I will let you take it, Deb. If there's any questions throughout the presentation, please put them in the chat. I will be monitoring the chat, and Deb is very happy to answer questions as we go along or any comments. So with that, I hand off the reins to you. So thank you very much for joining us today, Deb.
Thank you, Larissa. And it's my pleasure to be here speaking with those of you who could join us today. And hopefully for some of those who couldn't make it or listening to the recording, glad to have you here. I recognize that everyone is in the midst of just craziness. It hasn't changed in the 45 years I've been in this industry. Every day seems to bring new challenges. So I just want to thank you for taking the time to give yourself an opportunity to have a conversation, to listen. One of my goals is to keep you engaged and help you to give yourself permission to help give yourself gifts and things that might help you in your job to make it just a little bit easier. First thing I'd like to ask all of you to do right now, though, is first, the gift I want to give you is the gift of a deep breath. Everybody just take a deep breath right now. I encourage you to turn your heads away from your email list and I know you're kind of listening on the side in some cases, and just give yourself permission to be present right now. Take another deep breath one more time for me. Quite frankly, this makes me feel good too. So it's all about me. I did attach a handout. I call it a workbook. I typically don't, if somebody wants my PowerPoint slides, I'm happy to send them to you. Just give me a call or shoot me an email and I will be happy to do that. But I find most folks, they grab them, they take them and they sit on their desk or somewhere and they don't really ever get used again. So at the end of the day, though, I do have a little workbook that I built for you. And the first thing I do in every one of my presentations is ask you to do 3 things. And the first one is in the course of this presentation, I want you to listen and hear for the things that you've got nailed, that you know, that you understand, you're able to give yourself I call it the pat on the back. And I want you to write one down. The second thing I hope you find in this presentation is something that you haven't thought of before. The inspiration, I hadn't thought of it that way. And I'd ask you to write that down as well. And then the third thing is hopefully from this, you might also get a little bit of what I call a kick in the backside, something that you hear and you go, I've had that on my list for weeks. I just need to get it done. And I'd ask you to write that down. With that one, I do ask you to put down a timeline or a deadline. And if you're smart, you'll share it with someone and tell them so you do actually get it done. I am confident that we all have things like that on our list right now. I certainly do. But I found as I was sitting through presentations like this many, many times over in my career, it was always a challenge to me to know how to feel about it or think about some of the things I learned. And by using those 3 things, it really did help me put structure and value into the time I was spending doing this. So those are my little helpful hints for you. Now, V2V came up with the acronym ADEPT a few years ago, primarily because we wanted to think about the way physician practices function. And this presentation, I don't know who all's in the room and where you're working today, but at the end of the day, I assume all of us are working with physicians in some fashion. So while our focus is the physician practice that can live in a myriad of different ways. And I've worked in almost all of them in my career, not by having to, but because I wanted to. And it was very interesting to me to find out there's some truths that matter regardless. But we wanted to be able to define something that gave you a sense of truly being an expert, one who's skilled and proficient in what you do, and what are the tools and resources you need to understand about your practice. Now, within MGMA, if you've been certified or being certified, you know there is the body of knowledge, and that is the sense of adeptness around you personally in your professional career. The intention behind this adept is to link it to value, because we're certainly going to continue to see within our industry the conversation of value, and it's more than value reimbursement. And that's something that I find a lot of folks don't appreciate, is how important value reimbursement is. While it's important part of it, it's much more important to look at the overall scope of the value proposition. And in having that perspective, we recognize that it's the satisfaction of needs with the use of resources. So we started to look at the way that resources in a practice are married together. And we came up with this acronym that helps promote people by developing skills, promoting synergy, and maximizing the overall performance of an organization by paying attention to these 5 distinctions. Before we get into those, though, a second tool that I've given you, and on your worksheet, you'll actually see a place where you can do your own assessment. But this tool is something that we've put together to help practices really look at themselves from a place of where should we be. There is no judging around the true or false of this, but it can be a helpful tool to give you insight into where your opportunities may lie in your practice. And quite frankly, it's sort of like the 3 questions around you personally. You can do the same construct for your practice as well. And these 30 questions are probably a few great pats on the back. We've got this nailed. The second one is there maybe some ideas we hadn't thought about as being important? And then I'm confident there's a few spots in here where you're going to go, yep, we've got to deal with this. I use this tool a lot with strategic planning with physicians because it objectifies a lot of things that can feel very subjective. So I'm not going to take the time right now in this webinar, but I hope that each one of you will take a few minutes to, first of all, contemplate this yourselves, but maybe hand it out to your whole team. And it's a great way to get some feedback from folks without it being personal or threatening, but then you can take it to your physician group or wherever your structure is in your organization to affect change. This can be a great catalyst for doing that, and or promoting, hey, we've got this under control. If you have any questions about this tool or anything else I talked about today, not only can you ask the questions in the chat now, and I've given Larissa to interrupt me if need be, you can also give me a call. I am a colleague of yours. I am happy to talk with you at any time about any question that you have. So that's another tool that we have in here to look at. And it starts to inform you then as to the areas that you might need to pay attention to within your organization. So the Adept Advantage that we came up with, and this is something that can be used for you in your own structure of your work, in your practice's overall structure, and even in systems and organizational structure. And what I will tell you is the things that we've listed here are kind of the tip of the iceberg, but they all interconnect with one another. And we recognize that interconnection as a part of the conversation. But we came up with applications, which is, how do we pay attention to technology, take advantage of that? So as I'm going through this conversation, and after I introduce these all to you, we're going to take each one of these individually, and I'm going to give you a couple of ideas, helpful hints, things you can consider to address an area that we find frequently is needing some support and help, and how to do that in your practice today. I hate to do this because I know I'm being recorded, but I just realized I forgot to put my clock up so I could keep track of time, because when I'm using one screen, I can't see a clock. So now you guys have to wait for a second while I do that. So thank you for your indulgence. Okay, so on this side now. Everybody take a deep breath again. Okay. So we're going to go through these different areas and talk about them and what's in them, and then how they can be helpful to you in your practice and what you want to accomplish. And quite frankly, this time of year, normally I'm out on the road doing strategic planning with a lot of organizations, walking them through this along with the other tools as they look forward to next year. Well, this year that's isn't happening as much because of we're all being kind of distracted by COVID right now. However, I would suggest that this is a great time, particularly for those of you whose practices maybe aren't as busy, especially with this new spike, to take a moment to sit and think about some things. I'm going to talk about planning as a part of the distinction process. So just consider this, as I have some time now to think about some things I might not have otherwise thought about as we go through this. So within the Adept Advantage, I will tell you that without apology, it ended up with effectiveness being kind of the heart of the word in the middle. And so that's the thing we need to focus on usually first, because from effectiveness, every one of these other areas gets touched. And effectiveness is our word for operations, for how things go. It's how we communicate, our workflow processes, and our processes. And I'm also challenged, I acknowledge this on every webinar I do, I talk with my hands. So you can see my fingers come flying up in front of my face here every once in a while. But I think this is something that we oftentimes take for granted. And I cannot tell you how frequently we find that so many of the complications that exist within a practice, and there's a difference between complication and complex. So just keep a perspective on this. We live in a complex industry, but what we frequently do is we make that complicated by adding layers and things because we just don't take the time to effectively communicate. So the first focus is frequently avoidance of communication has to do with things that are difficult conversations. And years ago, I hate having to talk to people about tough stuff until I finally came up with 3 things that I realized if I do these 3 things, I'm far more likely to be successful and be able to move on. The first is to be present. And one of the things that I find is very difficult to do is to not be distracted by things around us, lots of things going on. So if I'm going to have a conversation with someone, it's making sure that I am in that conversation with them. Try to do it in an environment that is somewhat isolated. The other thing is most of the time, I try to make sure my conversations are stand up. One of the things I learned several years ago was I took all the chairs out of my office except the one I sat in when I wasn't, I use a stand-up desk usually. When I'm not sitting down, I'm standing. And I found out that if I use standing meetings, first of all, they tend to be much shorter. And then the second issue is that you're able to say what you need to say, and then people know it's time to move on. They don't tend to want to sit and sort of see your office as a living room where they can, and you know, a lot of times there can be some emotion around this. It does frame things as this is the issue, here's what we're going to do, and then how to move on. If you haven't looked at Tracy Spear's things on how to effectively communicate, her leadership lab has some great tools around that. The other thing with dealing with difficulty is sometimes it's about being persistent. Don't assume that people get the message the first time around. Even with asking them to tell me what you heard, sometimes you have to repeat yourself a couple of times. And the challenge of that is to knowing though when the conversation is over. And I recognize this. I just think this is a funny cartoon, so I decided to put it in. The last thing that I work with is to look at things from more what's right than what's wrong. And even in difficult situations, outside of something that I have 3 things that are just tough, got to be dealt with. It isn't up for discussion. And that's if it's illegal, causes harm, or creates danger. And those 3 things, you just it isn't really a question of what the circumstances are, they have to be dealt with. But even doing those, some can be done frequently from a positive perspective. And that's a choice that we make. I'm going to talk about a little bit more about choice, but at the end of the day, those are the things I have learned to do when I'm having to talk with folks, especially if it's a difficult conversation. So perspective on that, if you don't have a whiteboard in your office, I encourage you to get one and put some of these things up on it as a reminder. It helped me a lot every time I go into an environment. I've been CEOs, I've been vice presidents, I've been executive directors, I've been practice administrators, and everybody who knows me pretty much knows that the two things are going to show up at Deb's office when she comes into an environment is a whiteboard, and then I have this board that I call my reminders board, and it has lots of key concepts on it that keep me present and focused in what I need to be doing and how I need to be going about doing it. The next piece around the effectiveness is actually using that word as a piece of truth around operations. And this is another time when I really challenge folks to be thinking right now. I want you to think about the work in your practice. And does it truly add value to the work? And quite frankly, if it doesn't, and you haven't heard my presentation on the stop it button, give me a call. But I offer you the opportunity right now to make a big circle on a piece of paper, and in the middle of it, write stop it. And I pull that out. I have a stop it button that actually I can hear say stop it. But the concept behind this is why do we keep doing things that add no value to what's happening? Because we think we should, because someone told us we had to, because there's a history. There's a myriad of things out there, I promise you, that are going on in your practice today that using the stop it button would afford you a significant opportunity for improving not only your workflow experiences, but your bottom line. One of my favorites is the cost of customization. How many things in your practice today are built for a specific individual's need that has nothing to do with the actual delivery of care? Who's created a form for themselves? How does that form get used over and over again? Does it truly add value? Frequently, you can have a conversation and go, tell me how this is used, and you find out that there's another workaround. It also has to do with ways people create avoidance, work avoidance, or CYA behaviors, quite frankly. So what are some of the things in your practice that is going on right now that are costing you because someone's having to manage something that has no value? I have a story about that is an organization I went into and was doing EMR implementation, and we were collecting all the paper that people use in the practice to put it into the EMR structure. And a woman at the front desk was spending 2 to 3 hours a day. This is the brief version, if you've, but making this spreadsheet, and it had all the physicians, it had all the patients coming in, the type of patients they were. It was a gorgeous piece of paper, color coded, all this kind of stuff. And it took her a significant amount of time every day to create this form from the different data points. And I asked her what she did with it at the end of the day, and she said she put it into a file folder beside her desk. I said, well, then what happens to it at the end of, after that? She says, well, at the end of the week, I take those and I put it into a filing cabinet behind her. And you can see where this is going, is that from there, it went into a banker's box on a shelf. And as far as she knew, no one else touched that piece of paper, but that's what she had been told was part of her job. So I took this document to the physicians and the folks building the EMR, and I asked them about this. I said, someone in your practice is spending 2 to 3 hours a day creating this document. Does anybody know what it's for? And there was dead silence, as you might well guess. And it was several days later that a physician came to me. She says, I think I know what that piece of paper was about. And I went, really? I said, what was it? She said, 3 years ago, she had a hissy fit about imbalance in her perception around call. And she perceived more call coverage expectations in their environment than the rest of her partners. She asked them to keep track of that for 1 week and then never went back and checked because she got over her hissy fit, and moved on. And ironically, that position had changed hands about 3 or 4 times. And in the course of that time, several people had been changed that chair, and each time they plussed it a little bit. And no one had called the question on why are we doing this? It was just part of the job. Of course, that's a pretty extreme example, but when you multiply the hours per day of that person's salary times those days per week times those per year, you get into several thousand dollars were spent on an activity that added no value to the organization. I promise you today, there is something like that going on in your organization right now. So treasure or hunt, I should say, opportunity for you to consider that. And what that's costing you. Clutter is another one. How many of your offices have stuff laying around that's been laying in the same place for 5 years and no one has touched it? Hit the stop it button. That's what spring cleaning is for. This pause in some of your practices is a great time to get in there. And if you haven't done it, I suspect a lot of people figured that out and have done it already. But if you haven't, it's well worth the effort. Clutter is distracting. It creates opportunities for error. People lose things. And quite frankly, the other thing is you find a lot of stuff you didn't know you had that you can use. And I can, do a lot of that. The other one is discommunication. And that's more the absence of communication as opposed to talking a lot. So if you need to think about within your organization, how many times are you not talking? And physicians, quite frankly, are notorious for this. Because of their common experience in education, they sometimes have this expectation of osmotic understanding, which is a phrase I coined years and years ago, of if I think it, therefore you shall know it. Usually if I'm in an audience right now, that gets a chuckle from folks. But at the end of the day, I think it's our obligation as leaders and managers and support team members to make sure we have clarity. Is something being told? Do not ever assume that someone understands things the way you do. And frequently you can tell that by the result that you get. So be clear in what you're expecting from someone, and asking physicians. That's frequently, I think, first thing I do is ask doctors is, do you share with your staff what you're doing when you're in an exam with the patient? Do they understand your work? Because how do you expect them to schedule properly? How do you expect them to be proactive if they have no clue what you're doing? And it's really a fun exercise to have them talk about that and to get people involved. The cost of stagnation is another one. See that a little less frequently today with more of online education, availability of YouTube videos, proactive ability to get in there and learn online. But frequently we find that as sometimes people just stuck in a rut. A rut's a coffin with the ends kicked out. So there's some opportunities there. Another tool that we have available, and I'm happy to send to you if you send me an email, is based on the LEAN model downtime acronym, which is identifying medical waste in your care delivery. And we've modified this to the physician practice environment. But if you're looking at budgeting issues and concerns about your bottom line, walking through this exercise can inform you quite dramatically as to where opportunities are to functionally save money. We have found thousands and thousands of dollars in practices when we've gone in and gone through the downtime acronym with them and it's evaluated. It's part of our assessment process, is really looking at the places where these things exist. It is remarkable. And frequently we find a lot of folks, when we bring these to their attention, they honestly either, they don't see it, you just don't know what you don't know, or it's a feeling of helplessness and I can't do anything about it. It's someone else's problem. And we like to challenge that and say, typically there's one small incremental thing you can do to shift this. So why don't we try that first? And do things in small steps frequently. I was mentioning to Larissa earlier that I like to run half marathons. I know, crazy as it is, but the only way I get them done is one step at a time, and I have to take small steps frequently. So that's the first thing I do is take one step. And I have about 20,000 of them that I have to take. Actually, it's closer to 50,000, I guess, altogether before I'm done. But at the end of the day, you have to start. And so that's frequently something we try to do. So if you haven't seen downtime, you can look it up. It's online, it's everywhere. And just look at how there's things in your practice. Now, there's some things, moving walls to move challenges around transportation, around motion. Some of those things are more expensive, but there's also exercises that can be done to influence how you move around a practice, and some things you can do to look at things slightly differently without having big expenditures around moving walls and things like that. So let's look at the rest of the downtime challenge and talk about application as our next strategy. So if you've got your workflows going and you've got your processes in place, then the thing to do is to start looking at places where you can take opportunity. And two of the ones we find really drop to the bottom line for you very quickly are in optimizing technology and inventory management. This is another one of my favorite cartoons, and it's the gap between think it done and get it done. Sorry, my hand's here. Think it done and get it done. And then there is a gap. Sometimes it seems like there's a miracle that needs to occur. I would argue that we're the miracle. And we're the opportunity, we're the transformation that can occur in a practice, and willingness to step up and say, we need to take this thing on and change it is huge. It's pretty tough to rail against the EMRs and stuff like that if you haven't taken the time to optimize them to your specific practice, and not just by default, oh, that's the way it is. We need to really think about it and how we use it on an ongoing basis. I just mentioned, from a software perspective, I've been in many practices recently which absolutely grieved my spirit that folks, new people to the team, were given less than a day's orientation for their whole job, including the use of the EMR. And there was just this assumption of plug and play. And that's, first of all, I think that's unfair. It's unreasonable. And it sucks up a whole bunch of backfill time around bringing people up to speed. You're far better off putting some upfront investment into fixing things as opposed to having to back in to an expectation of performance and proficiency, which doesn't exist. If nothing else, build up a bunch of YouTubes or podcasts or whatever around key concepts that you want your team to know and understand, and stick them out on YouTube and let them listen to them. Maybe, if you have to have them in their seat right away, then give them a half an hour once a day to listen to a podcast and understand things different. Make sure you're paying attention to updates and upgrades. Physicians struggle a lot, and that's my challenge, particularly in independent practices, with what I call checkbook management, which is the balance in the checkbook is what we have to spend, and I don't want to spend any more of it because then it's not mine anymore. And there's some opportunity in education to do around what that costs a practice and how to shift that thinking to being more, it's not true accounting or accrual based, but to really think about the impact of not investing on the front end and what that opportunity cost is. And I'm certainly happy again to help folks think through that on their own specific situations. Can't encourage you enough around hardware standardization to the best of your ability. It's very expensive to manage to 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, I don't know how many different printers with all of their different printer cartridges and all their different expectations. Same thing with laptops. The more you can standardize, the more cost effective it will be for your organization. And then security. And this is a place where I think that you need to be super, super smart, not beyond the regulations around this, but really paying attention. The threat is out there, and it's not just that TV show, but they're out there. And we need to be paying attention. I haven't been reading the headlines lately around all the ransomware situations that have been hitting practices, and they're not just large health systems or even smaller regional hospitals. They are physician practices. And I'm aware of some physician practices that have been decimated by ransomware. So it's not a joke, and I'm not being alarmist. It's serious. So if you aren't confident that you have a strong security system in place, please get someone to give you a hand with that. Inventory management is another one that I think you need to pay attention to, maybe differently than you have in the past. Do you know what your PAR levels are? PARs are how much do you need in a focused period of time, and keeping that on hand, and then the stuff you don't need. And it's challenging right now. The exception to this one I know is PPE. We are really being challenged by that, and there's no quick, easy option. It seems to be somewhat regional. I hear about it in some areas, and other people aren't having any trouble at all. But to the best of your ability, take advantage of any group purchasing options you have. A plug for MGMA, I know that they have a group purchasing program. Take advantage of and managing specifically your pharmacy reps. I don't know how many practices today, I haven't been out in the field recently, that still have pharmacy reps dropping into their offices. And I'm certainly within COVID, I'm sure it's not happening right now. But I know a lot of practices historically in the last 18, 24 months where pharmacy reps were still showing up, walking through the halls, interrupting physicians from their workflow, and that can suck up a lot of time. So think about managing that differently. Understanding what the staff's responsibility is, who in your practice are supply hoarders. They may someday run out of their very favorite pen. And so they keep 12 of them in their desk. And it's encouraging them to consider, is that really necessary? What is the likelihood? And I mentioned earlier around efficiency and effectiveness, the whole premise of spring cleaning. And that's an exercise that I do in practice, have done many times in practices. I started to say I do, but I don't have a practice right now. But once or twice a year, I actually ask the team to come in on a Saturday. And within a department or an area, I have everybody put all their personal things into a banker's box. And then I have them switch spaces and I have people go through all of the work stuff there and put it into 3 piles. Current, necessary, found and don't need, and garbage. And it's remarkable what you will find in doing that exercise with folks. And it refreshes things. And people come back with a great smile on their face. It's usually a 2 or 3 hour exercise, and I usually provide pizza. That may not be possible to do that right now in different environments, but it's a great way to recognize and find things you didn't know you had as well. The next one is the distinction one. And this is around several things. Social media being one of the biggest ones that's not on our list right now because it hits so many areas. But the 2 things I'm going to speak on today specifically are strategic process and patient engagement, because I don't think they get enough energy in our practices. Even with patient satisfaction is different, okay? We'll talk about that in a minute. But at the end of the day, does your practice have a strategic plan? Do you know, regardless of COVID, what your intentions are, what your goals are for the practice for the next 2 to 3 years? Now, COVID is a monitor and adjust part of that. But at the end of the day, we still need to have goals. We still have to have things ahead of us that we know. Is it to build the practice? Is it to partner? Is it to change? Is it to recruit? There's a number of things that can be part of this process. Is it to stay consistent and maintain your patient base? Is it to take on new services? All of those things are part of a strategic process. And it's important for everyone to be on the same page, because otherwise you will be jerked around for whatever particular whim that shows up within the partners of the practice, within even employed physicians. Everybody will get these different things. And I used to have a goal set of 3 to 5 goals with a timeline attached to them. And at the end of the day, when something new would pop in that wasn't emergent, like I said, illegal, causes harm or creates danger, but someone would have an idea, we would look at it in context of the strategic goals and whether or not we needed to consider it or put it aside in the parking lot. And that's what my whiteboard was for, is those was one of the places where everybody knew there were ideas out there, but we weren't going to focus on them until we'd accomplished the things we said we were going to get done. Here's a great list of why to plan. If you need this list to sell the concept to your physicians or your organization, please don't hesitate to reach out to me. But at the end of the day, there's a true value and cost associated with not planning and not having a reserves and understanding where we are as an organization. So this is just another way of the reason why. There's a myriad of ways to go about accomplishing it. I think that one of the ones up here that I think is this really important is that you need to link strategy and budgeting. And that's something that doesn't happen as much as it should. And how do you go about creating a budget if you don't know where you're going? Now, I've always seen budgets not so much as a constraint, but as a guideline. And that's another philosophy conversation, is you should always meet your cost budget within, a few percentage points. Revenue should always have an opportunity for growth. And it needs to be something, though, that gives you a sense of where are you. And we're going to talk about key performance indicators in a few minutes. But at the end of the day, those are the things that you need to be considering. And I just thought that Thomas Edison's quote is pretty fun as well. So if anybody's hallucinating out there, have a nice time. Okay. Patient engagement. And this is another one of my things. Okay. We've used the word, we sort of toss around patient satisfaction. Well, if you really think about the concept of satisfaction, that's personal. That's my own impression of things. What we really should be thinking about is how we engage patients in being part of their care solution. If anybody's heard me speak before, you also know that healthcare is one of my pet peeve words. It only didn't start to exist until I think the early 80s, mid 80s as a word. Before that, it was medical care, medical insurance. And the challenge is we're in the business of medicine. We're not in the business of health. We're helping people be healthy. But at the end, that's an individual thing. And our job is to help them engage in being part of that solution. And there's, again, a real cost to not paying attention to this. So how do you help patients be in compliance? How do you consider the role of consumerism in your practice? How do you create partnerships with your patients so that physicians have a relationship with them that is ongoing, unless there are some specialties in which that doesn't matter. Physiatry, the ones where you have a one-off visit, I get that. But for the most part, physicians go into this to connect with people. That's why they want to be in the business of medicine. And are you paying attention to your outcomes and quality metrics as a way to, quite frankly, negotiate with payers? Profitability, no margin, no mission, no mission, no margin, however, which way you want to look at it. At the end of the day, we got to have the money to get the job done. And I think it's important, though, to keep ourselves in a perspective of this, of bigger perspective beyond what we see in any given moment. 2 data points do not make a trend. For someone like me, where the numbers and getting the numbers is very difficult and challenging for me. So I surround myself with people who are very good at it. My partners all know that they don't ask Deb to do math in her head. I absolutely value that, but I also do know what are my critical data elements that I know that I must be paying attention to on a regular basis. So if you don't have consistent data, which been in a couple of organizations recently, in which the paucity of data was impressive to us, and people were making up their own because they couldn't get it from the system, which is tragic, quite frankly, because it's not really that hard to get to. So it's figuring out what are the key data elements that you need in your organization. Here's some of them. There are sources for data, but at the end of the day, there's probably about 5 to 7 key performance indicators that you need to pay attention to. They're usually listed. There's myriads of places where those things are listed. Around receivables, most of them sit in the receivables side around revenue. And people use them in different ways. All I ask is that you use them consistently. Don't change up how you're gathering your data. Always gather it consistently. That's the only way you're going to see change. I find people trying to manipulate data to make it better, and that doesn't help. It never tells you where to find the solution for the issue. So this is one of those things where you make sure you know and find what you need to know as consistently as you can. Sorry, I got scrolled by another component of this piece of it. At the end of the day, do not overwhelm with data either. Our key performance indicators literally are on a single sheet of paper. And I'll tell you a secret. I've had in the past physicians who demanded inordinately large stacks. They want the whole printout. They want all the data. And one time, I used to, back in the day, we do pin feed printers, and there'd be these reports that would go on for hundreds of pages. And at the top was the summary of that. And then it would be all the supporting documentation underneath. And all the physicians in practice, they wanted to see the whole stack every month. And I knew that they were just taking that stack and putting it on a shelf because I could see it collecting dust. So one year, was in December, I put dollar bills in between the pages, about 20 bucks in each one. I didn't say a word. I just stuck them in there and I put them on their desks. And in January, I picked up the December reports and took them to the doctor's meeting and started to pull out the dollar bills from the pages. And I said, now really, this is how much time it's taking me to do this. Is it worth it to you to do this when you're not looking at it or paying attention to it? And we stopped printing those out. So sometimes there's fun ways you can give an object lesson to folks that, you know, creates a sense of tangible perspective. From another critical piece around the data is pay attention. I mean, besides the key indicators and pay attention to them is, are you using your EMR as something beyond the billing tool that everyone complains that it is? What are you helping your physicians understand about their patients? Are your doctors, do you have a physician who's, you know, a techie who can build out reports that help you understand who your patients are? That can be a really fun clinical exercise for docs, and I'll sometimes do some myth busting. People tend to hyperbolize around the always, every, never statement. And I found that sometimes if you can get some data out, you go, well, no, you have 20 patients in your practice that are a challenge. You have 1,980 that are on, you know, doing great, and you're having an amazing experience with them. Putting some quantifiable data in front of folks, especially when they're feeling stressed, can really ameliorate some of that stress for them. Using benchmarks for best practice comparisons. Obviously, MGMA is a great resource for that. There's myriad of ways to do it. But best practices is a great, I'm competitive. I like to know what's going on out there. I like to see what my colleagues are doing. And this is the place where they, you know, attaboy, on spot, am I on target? Now, people can come up with a myriad of reasons why their data is different from someone else's. And I would argue that the percentage amount of truth to that doesn't support the fact that you still can't look at it as a goal, a range, and an aspiration. You can always come up with a why you can't. Think about the why you cans. And then paying attention to external data sources. Again, I mentioned MGMA, but there's a lot of other places you could get data. Do not become insular in your data management. You need to have those external touch points in your organization. If you need help thinking of what they are, give me a call. Okay, so this is an example of what our KPIs look like. It's going to give you a sense of what that looks like. Another tool that we use that you may have seen, and these are easy ones to make as well in Excel spreadsheet, is you may come up with, we want certain expectations in certain key strategic areas. You pick 3 or 4 metrics for that area. You give them a weight, a value to them, and then you can capture that data on a monthly basis. I would not do more than 5 to 10 data elements. Otherwise, your whole job is going to be around managing that, and that's ridiculous. But if you're doing well in these key areas that align with your strategic plan, you're likely to have a successful practice. I have had many times when I've gone in to do practice turnovers, and frequently have just found that, you know, it's the old adage, you know, what you measure is what you will get for performance. That's not exactly how it's quoted, but you get the idea. The thing I touched on budgets really quickly. The key one on this one, I'm actually going to use my mouse for a second here. This is the thing that I believe is something we lose sight of. Budgets don't define the practice, they inform it. And this is one that's a tough one because a lot of larger organizations live and die by the budget. And for those of you who are numbers folks out there, I completely respect the importance of what the budget informs and implies, especially in large, complicated organizations. But at the end of the day, we've all got to be using critical thinking skills of our own to understand this is what we expected and anticipated. Pay attention to the shift, understand why it exists, but don't necessarily make it a failure point for an organization. Now, if you're bleeding red month over month, you've got a problem. That's obvious. But it isn't just a hand holding, wringing your hand kind of thing. Is take advantage of what does that imply. My experience personally has been is you never improve a budget on cost. The only place to truly improve a budget is on revenue, which is a volume discussion in our current medical environment today. So I'm obviously opinionated on that one, but at the end of the day, I have found typically the more I spend, the more I make. So it's paying attention to those correlations and not throwing bodies at it isn't necessarily, but I'll tell you, back to the cost conversation around downtime and the places where you can find effectiveness. I spend $5,000 getting a physician's computer properly set up for him to use it or she to use it with, all the right tools and things on the front end and have someone do that. It saves hours and hours of physician time when they can be seeing another patient, they can be spending time working in another area. There's a myriad of ways that you can recoup on those expenditures. So don't be afraid of the front end cost of something. Run it out as an ROI. It usually pays for itself over and over again. More bodies is not necessarily the case on that, but definitely around systems and processes, it for sure is. So be paying attention to those kinds of things when you're thinking about budgets. Not intended to offend, but to create a little bit of humor here, is don't lose sight of some things that may be hiding in places that you weren't expecting them. I just think this is a funny picture. But the truth of this is, it is easy to become myopic in our practices today. If you can't afford to bring someone in or have someone help you out, take advantage of one another. Quite frankly, I think that's the thing we lose sight of the most frequently, is that we don't give ourselves opportunity to take advantage of one another's skill sets. And I used to have a colleague that I would work with in another environment, and we had similar practices, but we were far enough away that we didn't compete with one another. And about once a quarter, I would bring her in to do a staff meeting for me. And I would give her a list ahead of time of the things I wanted her to tell the staff, I wanted them to know. And she would say it, and then I would do the compliment to her. And it was fascinating for us to hear the team go, well, so-and-so said, da-da-da-da-da. And I'm just sitting there kind of smirking in my mind going, yeah, if I'd said it, they wouldn't have listened to it. And that's just some of the human dynamics. So take advantage of one another and play to one another's strengths. The two places that talent can certainly impact your adept abilities, beyond the obvious ones I've already mentioned, are culture and the challenge of embedding critical thinking into your practice. So as we all know, culture eats strategy for breakfast. What you also need to know is culture is a top-down experience. Process is bottom-up. So you want culture, the physicians in your practice, and how they behave and treat each other, and how you engage with them defines the culture of your practice. Flat out the truth. And this is a wonderful conversation to have with physicians, and there's a myriad of tools around it, but it's really calling the question. If they don't like how something's going, the first thing they need to do is look in the mirror. Because I promise you, the embedded culture of medicine is it's a culture of waiting for orders. It's the last caste system truly alive and well in the United States. It's a cross specialty, it's in a myriad of places. But if your physicians are complaining, they need to look at themselves first. And that seems a little bit scary sometimes because they are the physicians. But what I also tell you is they're human beings. They get up just like we all do. And it's really calling that question. Well, let's talk about the culture of this practice then. This is how you're feeling. Can you tell me where that comes from? And my intention is to ask what I call reflective questions that force them to face themselves in the mirror and talk about it. Not something folks like to do very much, but it's kind of one of those things where you have to stand up and say, I'm not going to listen to you complaining anymore if you're not willing to take it on and take advantage of what we can do to change it. Don't expect me to do it. So I think that's something it's fun to do. It's a challenge to do. Getting surgeons, I mean, there are specialists or folks who are predetermined to certain specialties by their personalities, that some of this is a challenge for, and you have to call it. And if you don't, then you have to live with it because you'll get what you get. So don't be afraid of it. The other piece of this, though, is morale. And I got a lot of folks telling about the morale right now in your organizations is sucking air. And unfortunately, most people equate morale with happiness. And I have to challenge you on that. Happiness is an emotion and it's personal. It's my responsibility. Morale is actually a very interesting definition. It is the application of discipline, confidence, and enthusiasm at a particular point in time. When I finally recognized this is the definition, as opposed to making my team happy, I realized that if I create structure for my team, give them the confidence to do what they do, and then I'm their cheerleader in believing in them, it was fascinating how much more joyful and happy, engaged people were. Now, it's an 80-20 world perspective on this. And sometimes right now, I'm sure it's seeming like it's that 80-20 is reversed. But if 80% of the time people are doing a pretty rock star job, celebrate it. And only call the question if it's illegal, causes harm, or creates danger. I used to say illegal, on fire, someone's going to die. And I decided that was kind of morbid. But at the end of the day, those are the things that you should have no tolerance for. Everything else, you should be sharing and showing grace to folks, giving them the opportunity to grow beyond their programming, because what that does then is that leads then into the whole conversation around critical thinking. And how do you create critical thinking for folks? Is you give them the opportunity to learn and fall forward, is what I call it. Are you giving people a chance to learn from their mistakes and move forward? Now, Tracy Spears would say, as I mentioned her earlier, 3 strikes and you're out. My usual response is the first time someone doesn't catch the vision or do something, it's an opportunity to learn. The second time is an opportunity for consequences to reinforce the learning. And the third time, my usual response is this is just not a fit. And my favorite phrase is a duck is a duck, and you can't send a duck to Eagle School. And I would call the question on, then you have someone in a fit that doesn't fit. And certainly do not keep someone in a space in which they cannot be successful. That's quite frankly, I equated it with being cruel. I wasn't helping them, and I certainly wasn't helping myself. We're both miserable. You have to hit the stop it button. So, thinking about it from that context for me really framed it differently. So with that, I know we're really close here to the timeline. Reminding you again of the fun aspect of looking at it as becoming adept or are adept, and how to apply that in your practice, because each one of you wants to be adept. But at the end of the day, the one thing I mentioned earlier, I don't want you to ever lose sight of, is where does transformation really live? It lives within this room. If I was speaking with you in person, but actually each one of you online, you are each other's best resource for figuring out how to get things done. I've been privileged to be mentored by some wonderful people through my career. I've had the privilege of mentoring others. And I think it's the willingness to be brave, to reach out and ask others, gosh, I've got this issue going on. I suspect it happens. I know you folks in the Midwest and Missouri are friendly folks, and reach out to one another, but I certainly hope you do that. You are not held captive to someone else's beliefs, that you take the time to reach out to one another. And that's how you're truly going to see a difference in your own professional development, as well as those around you in your organization. So with that, Larissa, I thank you for the opportunity to spend time with all of you. And if there are any questions, I'm happy to answer them quickly now.
Okay, so we don't have any questions yet in the chat or the Q&A or anything. So we'll just give it another minute or so. And
our folks can turn on their microphones if they want, and we can just talk. If you want, I mean.
I don't know if we can do that.
Oh, okay, then never mind.
Yeah, I'm not
never
sure.
Mind. Okay, sorry. Bad idea.
Well, thank you for sharing all that information. I would just love for you to come in and do the same thing for my life if I could. There would be lots of stop it buttons in my world.
Yeah. Well, you can apply them. I can send you a stop it button. Okay, actually, you can make your own. It's a big circle and you just write stop it in the middle of it. You can color it in if you'd like.
Yeah, I can do something like that. I'll do that and hang it up on my wall and have your voice in the background for me. So I'll give it another minute. Does anyone have any questions? You can put them in the chat. Definitely reach out to Deb with any other questions about your practice or anything else. All of this was such valuable information, and I thank you again. So I will go over the upcoming events. So of course they're all virtual, and I can't believe we've reached the end of 2020. But in January, we actually have 2 webinars, one on Wednesday the 13th and one on Wednesday the 27th. And then we have our virtual Medicare update on Wednesday, February 10th. So we're starting the year off strong. Planning to get back to more of a regular routine sooner rather than later. Here's hoping for the best. And also a quick note, if you haven't already, don't forget to renew your membership dues for 2021. Definitely help with the MGMA keeping us up and running and going and everything. So with that, I don't think we have any questions or anything, but again, thank you very much for your time, Deb. And thank you for sharing this amazing information with us.
So I want to wish everyone a happy holiday. And more importantly, the MGMA dues, if anybody needs a cost value proposition for the cost of dues to share with why they should be something you, your organization should be supporting, and give me a call. I can give you, I frequently give several $1,000s worth of value for your, what is relatively a minor dues amount in an organization. That's one of those front end things that has a huge reward. So the webinars alone pay for your dues. I'm sorry, but folks need to understand that. So sorry, I had to put a plug in because you know me.
Oh, I mean, absolutely. I might be talking to you and we can put that information in an email to send out to our people. Yeah. Amazing content.
So, yeah.
So with that, I will end the webinar, but thank you everyone for joining us today. Have a good one.
Thanks a lot, Larissa.
Bye.
Bye.